Roughly 79 million Americans are infected with the human papillomavirus. These statistics are especially disturbing since this virus is known to be the cause of many different types of cancer. In fact, in the United States, approximately 10,000 women get cervical cancer a year and 3,700 die from the HPV-related disease. It is the second leading cause of cancer deaths among women in the world, according to WebMD. The necessity for study of this significant public health concern are obvious. Despite the apparent need for research, education, and legislation to assist infected HPV individuals and to prevent others from contracting the disease, this issue is subjected to the usual fate of the many concerns introduced for legislation. An analysis of the HPV public health concern reveals the challenge and roadblocks encountered while trying to promote the awareness of this devastating health threat that can be significantly reduced by proven vaccines.
HPV is a common virus that has been around since the Greek gods and has infected nearly 80 million people, or 1 in 4 in the United States. Nearly all sexually active men and women will contract the virus at some point in their lives. The CDC estimates that about 14 million people, including teens, become infected with HPV each year. HPV does not discriminate. Race, religion, age, income, and where a person lives has no or very little impact on if a person will become infected with the virus. HPV can be the cause of many cancers that include cervical, vaginal, vulvar, penile, anal, throat, and genital warts. The HPV vaccine is recommended for preteen boys and girls before they become sexually active. The vaccine is given in a series of 3 shots that are given within a 6-month time frame. Policymakers should pay close attention to the HPV vaccine because it ultimately protects citizens against contracting these deadly cancers, which in turn will most likely lower healthcare costs. HPV Action is a foundation that includes 44 patient and professional organizations. They work together to reduce the health burden of HPV. HPV Action plans to deliver an advocacy campaign to achieve HPV vaccination for all boys and girls by the age of 12 to 13. By offering the vaccine to boys as well as girls, HPV Action believes this will provide maximum protection for both men and women against cancer. Legitimizing HPV vaccines is fairly new on the radar of advocates, experts, and foundations. Legitimizing the need for HPV vaccines as a public issue has only been going on for about 10 years. The FDA approved the use of Gardasil as a vaccine against HPV on June 8, 2006. Most of the public fears related to the HPV vaccine are more myth than actual reality. There is an absence of major health policy initiatives that is deeply felt in the U.S. A multifaceted educational approach on the importance of vaccination against HPV is what is currently being used. The president decides what to put on his agenda based on what he feels is needed or wanted more by the American people. The United States Congress has the power to set their own agenda, but the president has a strong influence. The State of the Union address is the start of the president's influence. He lays out his own goals to the American public. After that, he must stay in contact with the media so the public will not forget the agenda he has set. Unfortunately, the president has not put vaccination against HPV on his agenda. The president's cancer panel has reached out to him to no avail.
When it comes to vaccine legislation, political parties play an integral role in the process. The Democratic Party is the current party associated with healthcare, as they were the ones who pushed through the Affordable Care Act, whereas the Republican Party was, overall, not in favor of this legislation. While not in favor of the ACA, Republicans have worked with Democrats to create vaccine policy, which is seen as a vital health issue. However, the constituency of the Republican Party seems to be leaning away from mandatory vaccine legislation. Party leaders, especially the majority leaders, play a vital role in policymaking as they are the ones directing which bills go to which committee, which ones go to a vote on the floor, and when they can do so. There are specific rules on how exactly a bill comes before Congress, gets assigned a committee, and comes out of the committee and goes to the floor of each chamber. Once Congress passes a bill, it moves on to the president. Congress may not move swiftly, but at least they have specific directions on where to move. There is currently little federal legislation of mandatory vaccination. However, there were a few bills and resolutions that were sent to committee and subcommittee in the last few years. These included House Resolution 117, recognizing the importance of vaccinations and immunizations in the United States, H.R. 1636, Vaccine Safety Study Act, H.R. 3188, Parental Right to Decide Protection Act, which would prevent the mandating of HPV vaccination, and H.R. 2232, Vaccinate All Children Act of 2015. None of these bills made it out of committee. The only federal vaccine mandate is for vaccines recommended by the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, which includes HPV vaccines, to be covered by the ACA. The committees that are in charge of vaccine legislation are the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee and the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Committees have power over a bill before, during, and after its introduction. The subcommittees can kill a bill simply by not passing it on to the full committee or to the floor. Conversely, after a bill passes out of subcommittee and goes to a vote, committee members can work with lobbyists and the president to gain support for it. The purpose of having bills go before committees is that it is easier and more efficient to have a few people become experts on a subject than to have each member of Congress know something about everything. Committees may have extensive powers but are limited by congressional rules, and it is hard for them to exceed their powers. Committees may, however, abuse their powers by holding up legislation, and individual Senate members may filibuster an unpopular bill. It is these abuses that prevent legislation from moving smoothly through the process. There are ways that committee members can be held in check. The need for both the House and Senate to pass the exact same bill, and the ability of the president to veto a bill prevents a few congressmen from passing unpopular or unfair legislation. The Senate has the ability to send a bill directly to the floor, bypassing committee, and can prevent it from being stalled. Legislation support can vary among the chambers of Congress. In the House, a bill must go through subcommittee to the main committee and then to the House Rules Committee before it can go to the floor to be voted on. In the Senate, a bill comes out of committee and goes to the floor for a vote. The two chambers also differ in the way legislation is passed. Multiple referrals of jurisdiction are common in the House, not so much in the Senate. Most legislation in the House starts in the subcommittees, whereas in the Senate, the role of the subcommittee is more varied. The House also requires any bill coming out of committee to include a written report with cost estimate and comparison of existing law. The Senate does not. With the different procedures, it would seem that legislation would more easily pass the Senate, as there are fewer hoops to jump through and fewer members to try to convince to support legislation. However, the threat of filibuster in the Senate can overshadow any bill. It only takes one person willing to commit a filibuster to stop the process cold, but it takes a 3/5 vote to support cloture and move the bill on to vote again.
Interest groups include the CDC, FDA, and DHHS, the nation's vaccine safety monitoring system. The FDA licensed the HPV vaccines in 2006. The federal government approved Gardasil in 2007 June. Interest group inspired provisions reflected in major proposals include educating parents about HPV and also its connection to cervical cancer, and also reducing the cost of the vaccine by speaking with Merck, the producer of HPV vaccine. Partisanship is very important for approval and compliance with the HPV vaccine. Next, I'm going to be speaking about key interest groups. Key interest groups are NCI, the National Cancer Institute, that provides funding and support for health-related research and development through the RPG grant mechanism. The Budget Fact Book provides a summary of distribution of National Cancer Institute budget. Intramural research comprises 17.1 of the national total NCI's budget. Another key interest group is Women in Government. The WIG is a national 501 non-profit bipartisan organization of women legislators addressing complex public policy issues, including HPV and its elimination of cervical cancer. So next, I will speak about coalition groups. The coalition groups formed include the NCCC, which is a National Cancer Cervical Coalition. It was founded in 1996 as a grassroots and non-profit organization dedicated to women with or at risk for cervical cancer and HPV. NCC's partner, the Global Initiative Against HPV and Cervical Cancer, works throughout developing worlds as a platform to empower people and communities and societies to reduce the burden from HPV and cervical cancers. Support systems and services for NCC grassroots chapters whose mission is to educate their communities about HPV. Another coalition partner is ASHA and Voices for Vaccines, VFV. Now next, I'm going to be speaking about the PACs. The PACs also, which have the super PAC known as Independent Expenditure Only Committee, is a new kind of political action committee made possible by recent Supreme Court decision which lifted some of the financial restrictions. In the current political climate, there's a lot of fear that PACs are controlling the healthcare policy process. Corporations are shaping the way legislators vote on reforms. And last but not least, I'm going to speak about the agency that is responsible for writing the regulations. This agency is the CDC. And in comparison to other issues, corporations can influence policy making by managing public opinions.
Currently, HPV vaccination is a controversial issue. There are many reasons that some parents hesitate to vaccinate their children. They believe it's unnecessary since their child isn't sexually active. They believe letting their child get the vaccination will cause them to become sexually active, or they aren't informed and don't know the facts, or they have religious reservations. However, once the facts are known and the statistics are realized, one will probably come to the conclusion that it is a very important measure in reducing HPV. It needs to be known that HPV is mission possible. As you can see with the media that is displayed, it delivers the message that it is so vitally important to be informed before making a decision and encourages the parent and the child to both be active participants in their health care and choices, and encourages them to do further research through the CDC and to ask their doctor. This matrix compares several different key factors when looking at the options of possible solutions for children receiving the HPV vaccination. It compares the outcomes of letting the parents decide if their child should be vaccinated to having the vaccine mandated to just all girls in the certain age group to having it mandated for all boys and girls in the certain age group. The table uses population data from childstats.gov and calculates costs based on the previously mentioned vaccine series costs of $360. It also takes into account the fact that the outcomes regarding legislation vary on which political party holds the majority in office. The majority of people in the target age group for the HPV vaccine have private insurance. As previously mentioned, the HPV vaccine for the recommended age groups of males and females, Pap tests, and HPV testing for women are all covered under the Affordable Care Act. It is estimated that the newest vaccine, Gardasil 9, will begin being covered by insurance plans in January 2017. Individuals who obtain insurance through the new health exchanges are also covered for the HPV vaccine without any cost sharing. For those without private insurance, there are a few federally funded programs to cover the cost of the vaccine. The Vaccines for Children program is a federally financed program that pays for vaccines recommended by ACEP for children ages 18 and under who are either Medicaid eligible, uninsured, American Indian or Alaska Native, or underinsured. Almost half of all children's vaccines are paid for through this program. ACEP recommends VFC coverage for Gardasil 9 in February of 2015 for males and females ages 9 through 18. The Immunization Grant Program is where the CDC awards federal grants to public health agencies to help with vaccine costs. Funds lend coverage to children who do not qualify for the VFC program. Women and men ages 19 and 20 with Medicaid are eligible for Medicaid coverage of all ACEP recommended vaccines. Adults who are newly eligible for Medicaid as a result of the ACA development are covered for the vaccine as well as Pap tests without cost sharing in states that expand coverage. For adults 21 and older who qualify for Medicaid through other eligible pathways, vaccine coverage is an elective benefit and is decided on a state-by-state basis. As of 2010, approximately 37 states covered vaccines for women. State CHIP programs that are separate from their Medicaid programs must cover ACEP recommended vaccines for beneficiaries since they are not entitled for coverage under the federal VFC. There is currently no source of public funding for vaccines for uninsured adults aged 21 and older. For uninsured low-income adults, the vaccine manufacturers Merck and GlaxoSmithKline have established assistance programs to provide free vaccines.
Long tail theory suggests that our culture and economy are increasingly shifting away from a narrow focus of a wide variety of mainstream products and services located at the head of the demand curve and moving toward a wider focus of niche products and services available in the market located in the tail of the demand curve. To relate this to HPV exposure reduction, the y-axis of the graph represents the United States population that is unvaccinated and at risk to HPV. The x-axis represents the number of vaccines possible for the various strands of HPV. Currently, only a few vaccines have been FDA approved, and although they cover a majority of HPV, they do not cover all of HPV strands. As time goes on, more research will be performed, increasing the number of vaccines available. These vaccines that are developed will be made available to the public, decreasing the amount of people that are unvaccinated. As knowledge grows, the amount of people vulnerable to HPV will decrease and hopefully diminish. These new vaccines will allow more people in a broader age group to be vaccinated as well. The graph and table depict this long-tail theory as it relates to the population vulnerable to HPV and the HPV vaccination's projected path and trend toward invulnerability among the population.
HPV is a serious threat to America's public health. Contracting this virus is a significant risk factor in developing several forms of cancer. The administration of 2 proven vaccines have been demonstrated to be effective in the reduction of acquiring the virus and reducing the risk of developing related cancers. Despite all of the convincing evidence of the effectiveness of vaccines and the alarming number of HPV-infected Americans, it is still difficult to get significant backing on this serious health issue needed to move legislation through Congress. It is discouraging that such a grave health concern can be put on a back burner due to political ambitions, party politics, and even the current presidential election. This is disappointing since one of our roles of our government is to protect its citizens from preventable serious health threats.